Minecraft 1.21 is here, and in addition to bringing us the Tricky Trials update, it also brings us lots of goodies for data packs and map making, like the @n selector, data-driven enchantments, paintings and music discs, and more. My name is Sly Slime and this is a video of all the changes. The data pack version is now 48. Let's start with commands and the new selector. @n is a shorthand for the nearest entity, much like @p is shorthand for the nearest player. Using @n is equivalent to @e limit equals 1 sort equals nearest, and can also be combined with further requirements, like @n type equals pig. The item argument in the give, item and loot commands now support removal of components with an exclamation mark prefix, similar to the remove component format in other places, but without the need to specify an empty object. Using the damage command with a specified position value now causes any resulting knockback to be performed from that location rather than in a random direction. Paintings are now data-driven through files under the Painting Variant registry folder. The painting variant has 3 fields, width and height, representing the width and height of the painting in blocks between 1 and 16. And asset ID, which picks the ID of the sprite to show on the painting in the painting's atlas. And just like was previously the case with replaced painting textures, you can animate them using the MC Meta format. Since these are a registry type, they will mark a world as experimental and require the world to be closed and reloaded to take effect. Enchantments are now also data-driven, and all vanilla enchantments can be found as files under the Enchantment registry folder in the vanilla data pack. An enchantment is a file with a number of fields describing the properties of the enchantment and a number of effects the enchantment has. Description is the text component used to display the name of the enchantment. Supported items is the set of items that support the enchantment, either as an item ID, list of item IDs, or item tag. Primary items specifies the subset of items that the enchantment shows up in enchanting tables for, and on traded equipment. It is optional, and if omitted, all the supported items are considered primary. Exclusive set can be specified to make enchantments mutually exclusive. The value is an enchantment ID, list of enchantment IDs, or enchantment tag. Max level gives the highest value level of the enchantment. All enchantments range from 1 to their maximum level. Weight specifies how common the enchantment is compared to the total summed up weights of all enchantments. The higher the value, the more common the enchantment. Min cost and max cost determine the cost of the enchantment in the enchanting table and how much you get back from disenchanting it. Both these values are described by objects describing a linear relationship with the level of the enchantment. They have a base and per level above first objects that describe the calculation, where both values are integers. Anvil cost is the fee taken for the enchantment in an anvil and is a non-negative integer. The cost is halved for enchanting books. Slots is a list of the slot groups where this enchantment is valid. And finally, effects is a map of effect components. This contains most of the functionality of enchantments. To really get into that, we'll need to go through some of the available types. Many of the effects of enchantments have values that depend on the level of the enchantment. This is represented using a type called level-based values. A level-based value that is in fact not level-based can be written as a simple float value. For actual level-based values, the most common is a linear type. This has base and per level above first fields, just like the cost of the enchantment, except that the values are both floats. Clamped is a level-based value type that takes another level-based value and clamps it to a fixed range. The delegate value is set in the value field, and the limits are specified as floats in the min and max fields. Fraction is a level-based value that divides the numerator level-based value by a denominator level-based value. Levels squared is a special case that equals the square of the level plus an additional term. That term is specified in the added field. The lookup type is simply a lookup table with values defined for all relevant levels. The values field is a list of floats describing the values, 1 entry per level starting with the first level. It also has a fallback field, which is another level-based value used if the level of the enchantment is greater than the number of entries in the values list. So let's turn our attention to the effects themselves. Most of the regular effect components consist of lists of conditional effects. The conditions for these effects are the same as the loot conditions, which are evaluated with different contexts depending on what effect component it is. The effects fall into one of several categories: attribute effects, value effects, entity effects, and location-based effects. Let's start with attribute effects. These are effects that cause the enchantment to grant attributes to the user when the enchantment is effective. The fields of an attribute effect are attribute with the ID of the attribute to modify. ID is a unique identifier for the attribute modifier. This ID is also appended with a slot name when an enchanted item is equipped in a slot, which makes them stack properly. Operation is the operation to perform, one of add value, add multiplied base, or add multiplied total. Amount is the amount to modify represented as a level-based value. There's only one effect component that represents attribute effects, the attributes component, which is a plain list of attribute effects. Value effects are effects that modify the quantity of something. The add value effect adds a value to the quantity modified. The value to add is represented by a level-based value in the value field. Negative values are also supported. Multiply multiplies the quantity by a factor represented by a level-based value. Set sets the value to a certain level-based value disregarding the input. The remove binomial value effect runs a binomial random series and reduces the input value by 1 for each successful check. It has a chance field, which is a level-based value representing the chance for success in each pass of the series. And finally, all of can be used to combine multiple value effects. This can be useful if several value effects should be guarded by the same set of conditions. Plenty of effect components have value effects. Block experience and mob experience are lists of conditional value effects modifying the amount of XP that drop from blocks and mobs, respectively. Repair with XP is a value effect list for items that get repaired by XP. The value processed is the amount of XP turning into how much durability to repair. Damage is a value effect list for the amount of damage done by an attack. Knockback is similarly modifying the amount of knockback caused by the attack. Smash damage per block fallen modifies the amount of damage per fallen block dealt by a smash attack. Damage protection modifies the amount of magical armor provided against an attack. Armor effectiveness is a list of conditional value effects for changing the effectiveness of a target's armor in an attack. Equipment drops is a value effect for the chance that equipped gear drops when a mob is killed. The processed value is the chance between 0 and 1. Effects in this component type also have an enchanted field, which specifies which party in the attack should be enchanted to affect the result. Possible values are attacker and victim. Item damage is a value effect for the durability loss incurred by the use of an item. Ammo use is a list of conditional value effects for modifying how much ammo gets used when a projectile weapon is drawn. Crossbow charge time modifies the time it takes to charge a crossbow. Several effect components have projectile-related value effects. Projectile count for the number of projectiles like in multi-shot. Projectile spread affects the spread of projectiles when multiple are fired. Projectile piercing modifies the piercing target count of projectiles. And a couple of trident-related value effects: trident return acceleration and trident spin attack strength. For fishing, fishing luck bonus is a value effect for the amount of luck a player is given when fishing. The amount of total luck is then applied as the luck factor in integer form in the fishing loot table. Fishing time reduction is a value effect on the amount saved when fishing in seconds. Higher values here mean less time until a fish bites. The next type of effects is entity effects. These are effects that have an impact on the world, usually centered around an affected entity. Let's start by going through all possible entity effects. Apply mob effect applies a mob effect to the affected entity. Mob effect here refers to a potion effect. These have 5 fields. To apply is the effect to apply. This is an effect ID, a list of IDs, or a tag. If more than one effects are specified, one is chosen at random. Min duration and max duration are level-based values that determine the effect duration in seconds. A value is randomly chosen within this range. And min amplifier and max amplifier are level-based values that determine the span of possible amplifiers, again with one randomly chosen. Damage entity applies damage to the affected entity. These effects have 3 fields, starting with damage type, which is the ID of the damage type to use. Min damage and max damage are level-based values that give the range of damage, with one again picked at random. Damage item applies damage to the enchanted item in use. It has a single field called amount, a level-based value determining the amount of damage to apply. Damage is not applied if the item is used by a player in creative mode. Explode creates an explosion with a whole slew of configurable fields. Attribute to user is a boolean selector whether the user of the enchanted item should be considered the creator of the explosion. Damage type is an optional damage type ID. If specified, the explosion deals damage of this type, otherwise no damage is dealt. Knockback multiplier is a level-based value for how much knockback is cost. If omitted, the default knockback multiplier is used. Block interaction is the interaction the explosion has with blocks. None for no effect. Trigger for triggering redstone activated blocks like a wind charge. It can also be one of block, mob and TNT for an effect as if that type had caused the explosion, with the corresponding game rule in effect. So, for instance, block interaction being TNT means blocks explode and drop according to the TNT explosion drop decay game rule. You can also specify an immune blocks, block, list of blocks or block tag for blocks that are not affected and that fully block the explosion. Offset is a list of 3 integers specifying a block offset from the entity to where the explosion is centered. If omitted, no offset is used. Radius is a level-based value which specifies the radius of the explosion. Create fire is a boolean for whether the explosion should cause fires to spread around, like when blowing up a bed in the nether. Small particle and large particle are particle definitions for the particles of the explosion. And sound is the sound event caused. The ignite entity effect sets the affected entity on fire, which lasts for as long as the duration level-based value specifies, given as a number of seconds. Play sound plays a sound. It has a sound field specifying the ID of the sound event to play. Volume and pitch are both float providers which specify the volume and pitch of the sound, respectively. The replace block entity effect replaces a block. It takes a block state, which is a state provider like those used in world generation. Offset is a positional offset from the origin of the effect to where to place the block. This is a block positional offset of 3 integers and if omitted, no offset is applied. And predicate is a world generation style block predicate used to determine if the block should be replaced. If omitted, the block is unconditionally replaced.
Trigger game event. This is an optional field specifying a game event ID, and if specified, that game event is emitted when the effect successfully changes a block.
Replace disk works similarly, but replaces a whole cylinder of blocks in the world. It has the same fields as replace block, but also adds radius and height, which are level-based values for the radius and height of the cylinder. Run function runs a command function. The function field defines the namespace ID of the function to run. A function run this way is run at the event position as ~~~, and with @s set to the affected entity. Set block properties changes the block state of a block in the world without changing the block type. It also has an offset field which works the same way as for the other entity effects, and a properties map, which is a map of property keys to values, the same format as block state specified in the block state item component. It also has a trigger game event field. Spawn particles. You guessed it, spawns particles. Particle is a particle type definition. Horizontal position and vertical position specify where the particles should spawn. This is a typed object and can be either entity position, which places the particle at the exact position of the entity, or in bounding box, which randomly picks a position inside the entity bounds. You can also specify offset, a floating point value specifying an offset to the current axis. For in bounding box type positions, you can also specify scale, which scales the bounding box before picking a position. If omitted, the bounding box is used without scaling. Horizontal velocity and vertical velocity similarly decide the velocity of the particle, and are objects with fields. Base is a float provider which gives the base speed along the given axis. If omitted, the base speed is 0. And movement scale is a factor applied to the movement of the entity. For instance, a movement scale of 1 adds the velocity of the entity to the particle. If omitted, 0 is used. The summon entity effect summons an entity. The entity field specifies the entity type to spawn either as an ID, list of IDs, or entity type tag. If multiple options are specified, one is randomly picked. It also has a join team boolean that specifies whether the summoned entity should join the team of the owner of the enchanted item. Finally, entity effects also have an all-of effect that runs a set of entity effects, useful to run multiple effects without rechecking the same conditions. So, which effect components use entity effects? Hit block is an effect component for effects applying after a weapon or tool hits a block, including when a projectile fired out of an enchanted weapon hits a block. The affected entity is the projectile, or user of the item for direct hit. Post-attack is an effect component for effects that take effect after a completed attack. This type also has two additional fields called Enchanted and Affected, specifying how the effect should be counted. Both can have values Attacker, Damaging Entity, and Victim. So for instance, if Enchanted is Victim, Affected is Attacker, and the effect is a Damage Entity effect, you get a Thorns-like effect. Projectile Spawned is an effect component for effects that run whenever a projectile has been spawned. The affected entity is the projectile. And Tick is an effect component for entity effects that run every tick for an entity that has the enchanted item equipped. The last type of effect is the location-based effect. This is the type of effect which happens whenever an entity with an enchanted item equipped moves to a new location, that is, a new cell in the block grid. All entity effects can also be used as location-based effects, with the addition that attribute effects can also be location-based, in which case their attributes switch on and off as the entity moves, depending on if the conditions of the effect match. Only one effect component uses location-based effects, the location-changed effect component. There are also a number of one-off special effects that don't follow the general format of lists of conditional effects. Crossbow charge sounds is a special component for the sounds used when charging a crossbow. Only one of these can be active at a time, the one with the highest level is picked. Its format is a list of crossbow sound banks with start, mid, and end optional sound events for the sounds at that point in the charging process. Each entry in the list represents the sounds at one level of the enchantment, so the first entry represents sounds at level 1. Similarly, Trident Sound has effects for changing the sound of a Trident attack and work the same way. Each entry in this one is a single sound for the attack. Damage Immunity represents complete damage immunity. It is a list with conditional effects, but the effects themselves are empty objects. Any condition that matches incurs complete damage immunity. Prevent Armor Change is a special type which prevents the enchanted item from being unequipped from an armor slot. This takes effect by just being present. The component is an empty object. Another similar component is Prevent Equipment Drop, which prevents the enchanted item from being dropped on owner death. Since all the enchantment effect conditions are loot conditions, some new conditions and sources are exposed, and some changes have been made to adapt the loot table conditions for this new purpose. The targets in loot table conditions have been changed, with Killer now being called Attacker, Direct Killer now being Direct Attacker, and Killer Player now being Attacking Player. There's a new condition called Enchantment Active Check. This requires the Enchantment Active parameter, which means it currently only works in the location-based context for an enchantment. It has a single field called Active, which determines whether the enchantment under evaluation is required to already be active or required to not be active yet. A couple of conditions have also changed. The random chance field chance is now a number provider instead of a plain float. And the random chance with looting condition has been renamed to random chance with enchanted bonus. It no longer has a looting multiplier field. Instead, an enchantment field has been added with the ID of the enchantment, which grants the bonus chance. The chance field has been replaced with two new fields. One unenchanted chance field for the chance of the bonus applying to an unenchanted item, and a level-based value as enchanted chance for the chance of the bonus applying to an enchanted item with the right enchantment. Some loot item functions have also been changed. Looting enchant is now called enchanted count increase and now has a new field called enchantment with the ID of the enchantment that increases the yield. The enchant randomly function now has an options field instead of the enchantments field. This is an enchantment, a list of enchantments, or an enchantment tag. It also has an only compatible boolean field, which if set, only allows enchantments which are compatible with the loot item. It can be omitted, in which case it defaults to true. For the purposes of this check, all enchantments are considered compatible with books. The enchant with levels function no longer has a treasure field. Instead, its options field now also works exactly like the one for enchant randomly. And for the copy name function, the source field values have changed. The killer option is now attacking entity, and the killer player field is now last damage player. The modify contents function can no longer create overstacked items. There's a new number provider in this version, enchantment level. This provider sources its value from the enchantment level parameter and therefore only currently works in the context of enchantment conditions. It has a single field called amount, which is a level-based value. Let's move on to Jukebox records, which are now data-driven. This is driven by a Jukebox song registry folder. Jukebox song files have a sound event field, which is the sound to play. Remember that sound events have a different format for custom sounds than for built-in one. Length in seconds describes the length of the song, which controls how long the jukebox gives a signal, regardless of how long the actual sound is. If the sound is longer than this time, it will be aborted when the time is up. Comparator output sets the redstone level of the song from 0 to 15. And description is a text component that shows up as the name of the song. Together with this comes a new item component, Jukebox Playable. This component exists by default on music disc items, but can be added to any item to make it playable in a jukebox. It has a song field, which is the namespaced ID of the song to play. Show in tooltip decides whether the song name is shown in the tooltip, and is optional. The default value is true.
The food component saturation level can no longer be negative, and there's a new field called using converts to. This is an item with components, and eating the food converts it to this type, much like eating a mushroom stew leaves a bowl. Lots of cases where having a normally unstackable item with a stack size over 1 cause the extra items to vanish have also been fixed. Setting the custom data component in JSON made some numeric values get converted. Now that component also supports stringified SNBT format, which retains the data type of values. The Jukebox Playable component also comes paired up with a Jukebox Playable item predicate, which is a matcher for the Jukebox Playable component. It has a song field, which is a song ID, list of song IDs, or song tag. Enchantment predicates no longer have an enchantment field. Instead, they have an enchantments field, which can be an ID, a list of IDs, or a tag. If multiple enchantments are specified this way, any matching enchantment will be considered a match. Entity flags predicates have two new possible fields, is on ground for matching the on ground field of entities, and is flying for matching whether the entity is flying, which is defined as either flying in creative mode or gliding with Elytra. The player predicate field game mode now accepts a list of game modes. Location predicates also have a new possible field. Can see sky for whether the sky is fully visible from that location. That matches when the skylight is the maximum value at that location. Entity predicates have a new possible sub-predicate called the movement predicate. It has min-max limits for movements along any of the axes X, Y, and Z. You can also have a limit for the overall movement speed of the entity, the horizontal and vertical components of the entity's velocity, and limits for the fall distance of an entity. There's also another new sub-predicate called periodic ticks. The format of this predicate is a single positive integer, and the predicate matches once every n ticks in the entity's lifetime. So for instance, a periodic ticks predicate of 2 will match every other tick. There's a new location predicate available to entity predicates. It is movement affected by, and it is a location predicate for the block that affects an entity's movement, like an ice block or soul sand. This block is at most half a block below the entity, but can also be underneath a partial block like a carpet. And there's a new field for damage type predicates called isDirect. If specified, it puts a requirement on the damage being direct or indirect. Direct meaning the inflicting entity is the same as the source entity. For instance, a melee attack is a direct attack, whereas an arrow inflicting damage is an indirect attack.
The datapack format for many older registry folders has changed from using plural folder names to a singular one. This affects advancements, functions, item modifiers, loot tables, predicates, recipes, and structures. The legacy tag directory names for some of the older registries which had tag folders in plural have been renamed. That affects items, blocks, entity types, fluids, functions, game events, and decorated pot patterns, which are now all renamed to their singular forms. This version also comes with a good amount of new tags, most of them enchantment tags. A number of them relate to the functionality of enchantments. Curse, for enchantments that get listed in red and cannot be removed by disenchanting. Smelts loot for enchantments that cause loot to be smelted when dropped. And a number of tags for things prevented when mining, including bee spawns, decorated pot shattering, ice melting, and infested spawns. Some enchantment tags related to their availability. This includes tradable for enchantments that show up on traded books, on traded equipment for enchantments that can be randomly chosen for traded equipment, and double trade price for enchantments that add the double emerald cost in trades. In enchanting table for all enchantments that show up in the enchanting table. On mob spawn equipment for enchantments that show up in equipment worn by randomly spawned mobs. And on random loot for enchantments that show up in random loot chests. Enchantment exclusivity is now also determined by tags, with a number of new tags under the exclusive set folder. Enchantments in one of these tags are mutually exclusive. The experimental trade rebalance pack also has a number of new enchantment tags under the trades folder for the enchantments that show up on various levels in different biomes. There are 2 new damage type tags controlling the panic behavior of animals: panic causes and panic environmental causes. And a new damage type tag called burn from stepping, which is exactly the damage types that Frostwalker protects against. There's a new block tag called air, which contains all types of air. And mob interactable doors for doors that mobs can interact with. The music disc item tag has been removed. There's one new damage type in this version. It's called campfire, and it is a split off from the infire damage type. Attributes have also changed. Instead of having a UUID and name combination, attribute modifiers now have a single ID, which is a namespaced ID like elsewhere in the game. Such an ID uniquely identifies an attribute modifier in the set of modifiers for a single attribute. That is to say, you can have modifiers with the same ID on 2 different attributes without a conflict. The attribute storage for entities has also changed to be all lowercase, and the modifiers themselves are now stored in the same format as for items, with lowercase fields and the operation described as a named operation instead of an integer. Any existing built-in modifiers will be upgraded to their new built-in IDs, but any custom modifiers will upgrade to simply have the UUID as the ID in the Minecraft namespace. The format changes also apply to the attribute command, which now takes an ID instead of the UUID and name parameters. A number of the enchantments are also implemented using attribute effects for a number of new attributes. Let's start with a change. The generic.attack knockback attribute now also works for players. Generic.burning time is an attribute for how long entities burn when set on fire. This is a multiplicative factor, so 0 extinguishes the entity immediately, while a value of 2 makes it be on fire twice as long as usual. Generic.explosion knockback resistance is how well an entity resists the knockback from explosion, ranging from 0 giving no knockback resistance to 1 meaning fully resisting the knockback. Player.mining efficiency is a speed factor specifically applied when mining a block using the correct tool. Generic.movement efficiency is how efficiently an entity can move through terrain that impedes movement, like soul sand. A factor of 1 removes the entire penalty, a factor of 0 applies it fully. Generic.oxygen bonus is a value for how likely an entity is to avoid using up air when underwater. A value of 0 gives no bonus. Higher values give exponentially higher chances of not needing air. Player.sneaking speed is a value for the speed factor when sneaking between 0 and 1. 0 means unable to move at all. 1 means no movement penalty compared to walking. The default is 0.3. Player.submerged mining speed is the mining speed factor when submerged. The default is 0.2 in a range from 0 meaning unable to mine at all, to 20 meaning 20 times as fast as above water. Note that other penalties like for not touching the bottom may still apply. Player.sweeping damage ratio is how much of the base attack damage gets transferred to a secondary target in a sweep attack, ranging from 0 meaning none of the damage to 1 meaning all of it. And finally, generic.water movement efficiency means how much of the movement penalty from being underwater is resisted. The default 0 means none of it, ranging up to 1 which negates the entire movement penalty. Some improvements have been made to how attributes are handled when a player is killed or switches dimensions. Base values for attributes are now kept through death and respawn, and all effects and modifiers now remain through any dimension transfer. The attributes listed in tooltips for items no longer list the same thing for all the armor slots for effects that work in multiple slots. Instead, modifiers that work when the item is equipped in any slot are shown as when equipped. Those that work when the item is held in either hand are shown as when held, and those that work when the item is worn in an armor slot are shown as when worn.
The coloring of some attributes in tooltips has been reversed to avoid beneficial but negative effects showing up as red.
Arrow-like projectiles now have a weapon field containing the item stack that fired the projectile, and which is also used as the source of any enchantments that affect it. With this, the shot from crossbow field has also been removed.
The power tag of many projectile types has been replaced by an acceleration power tag that specifies how fast the projectile accelerates and its top speed. This affects all the fireball and wind charge projectile types as well as wither skulls.
The ominous item spawner is no longer experimental and can now be used properly in commands with the spawn item after ticks field working properly. There's also a new type called enchantment providers. They are a way for the game to put enchantments onto things that show up in ways other than the regular loot tables and such. This includes various situations when mobs spawn with enchanted equipment, some cases of enchantments in villager trades, and the special case of Endermen dropping items on death. Enchantment providers can have different types. The most simple is called single enchantment and points out a specific enchantment through the enchantment field, and the level field int provider provides the level. Enchantment by cost gives one or more enchantments from a set of options, as if chosen through using that cost in an enchanting table. It has an enchantments field which determines the options, an ID, list of IDs or tag, and cost is an int provider for the cost. Enchantment by cost with difficulty works very similarly, but the cost is instead calculated using the local difficulty of the area, according to the min cost and max cost span fields. World generation style block predicates, which are now also used in the replace block and replace disk entity effects, also have a new type, unobstructed, which passes if the selected block is unobstructed, that is, no entities are in the space of the block. It has an offset just like other block predicates. There's a new placement modifier type called fixed placement, which lets you place features in fixed positions. This has a positions list which contains any amount of positions represented as a list of 3 integers. There's also a new feature type, end platform, for the obsidian platform in the end, which has an empty configuration. And in structure news, there's a new optional dimension padding field in structure definitions. Setting this field ensures that the structure is always that many blocks away from the edge of the dimension, that is, the very top or very bottom of the world. It can be written as a single integer applying to both top and bottom, or split into an object containing top and bottom fields, specifying a different padding amount for the top and the bottom of the dimension. There's a new optional field in Jigsaw structures called liquid settings. It has 2 possible values. The default is apply waterlogging, which makes waterloggable blocks that overlap already existing water during placement become waterlogged. Alternatively, liquid settings can also be ignore waterlogging, in which case the blocks of the structure overwrite the water fully. The single pool element template pool element type also has an optional field with the same name and possible values, controlling the behavior of blocks in that template specifically. And that's it for data pack changes in Minecraft 1.21. If you appreciate this video, please leave a like. It takes a huge amount of time and effort to make them. Thank you for watching. My name is Sly Slime and I'll see you next time.